Hi, this is Travis with another video for you guys. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, as well as I've been a personal trainer a little over 15 years. And so planks are an exercise that I definitely see in the gym all the time. I see some done pretty well, and I've seen some done not so well. So I just want to talk a little bit about form on the plank today. I also want to discuss, for those of you who are maybe new to the fitness game, not really able to do a traditional plank that well, I'll show you how you can kind of get into that. And then certainly for those of you who are also higher level, maybe running out of ideas on how to make a traditional plank a little harder, I'll certainly be covering some topics there as well, showing you guys some cool modifications to make them a little more challenging. So if you're looking for a little more core strength, the muscles in the midsection here, you come to the right place. So let's go ahead and start planking. Okay, so your garden variety plank is generally where you're going to have a straight line sort of falling between your ear, your shoulder, your hip, and to an extent your ankle, but I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And so an easy way to think about this is if you were just laying on your back. And so if you're laying down sort of flat like this, not that everyone sleeps this way, but from there pretty much being in a plank position, that's pretty much about where you'd want to be. So the only difference is you just got to be there face down now. And so another way to think about it is if you were getting your height measured. So imagine from this position you wanted to see how tall you were. You would kind of fall into a plank position. Now to make this easier, many people kind of lift their hips a little bit above that line, and because that takes your midsection a little more out of the equation, puts some more force on your shoulders. Now, many people are a little stronger in their arms, so it's easier to do this. That said, I do see people kind of down here sometimes too, and that's pretty hard in your low back when your hips are kind of below your shoulders like this. So just try to find kind of about where that straight line between your ear as well as your shoulder and your hip. Now, I tend to, now this would kind of be more of a straight line between everything. I kind of come up here sometimes a little bit more, just because I feel like that's a little easier, I should say, on your low back. As long as you don't feel it too much in your low back and you mostly feel it in your core, there's probably a little wiggle room if your hips are completely lined up with your ankle. But you don't want to be too off as far as that line between the ear, the shoulder, and the hip. That should be pretty straight. And then the other thing you want to think about is the shoulder blades, okay? So not to overwhelm your mind with what to think about, the first thing I would think about is making sure that you've got the straight torso. And once you feel like you can kind of automate that and you think you've got a good line, then maybe worry about what your shoulder blades are doing. And for those of you who maybe don't have a great body awareness yet, it's kind of hard for you to know where you are in space when you're doing that. Two things you can do, or maybe three actually. Certainly if you can lay next to a mirror, even a full-length mirror, you can probably get a look at yourself, and so as you're doing a plank, you can kind of see if you feel like you look like you're fairly well lined up. Certainly a second pair of eyes can help too. You can ask somebody, do you look like you're fairly straight? Sometimes even putting a foam roller, on your back as you're sort of planking, they can kind of set it on your spine, make sure it's kind of contacting your head, kind of the middle of your back and your butt, and that's a pretty nice way to know that you're in that straight line. And then also just, always ask yourself where you're feeling it. So if you, are feeling it a lot in your low back in kind of a bad way, that's kind of achy, I'd say, well, that's probably not going to be ideal. If you're feeling it mostly your core, kind of your shoulders and your arms, more just kind of like the muscle working, then your form is probably not too bad. So that's also kind of a way you can gauge if your form is in the right place. But the way to know about your shoulder blades, so ideally what you want to do with your shoulders is also kind of have them pushed away from the mat a little bit. So sometimes I see people kind of sunken in here, and that forms almost like a little bit of a trough between your shoulder blades. But ideally what you want to do is be a little more pushed away from the mat, okay? So here I'm kind of actively pushing my shoulder blades apart a little bit, not as hard as I can, but I'm pretty much keeping them dialed in. And then I'm also bracing my core to an extent as well. And then a traditional, plank again, I would just be holding this for time. Obviously once you run out of gas, you can't hold the form anymore, and you would just take a break and then you're done. Now for those of you that find that a little bit hard, just to sort of lay down on the floor like that and do a plank, maybe again, you're newer to the fitness game, it's just a little bit tough for you right now. The higher your elbows are, the easier it's going to be. If you are pretty close to being strong enough to doing a regular plank, you could use something like some yoga blocks, and that puts a little more of the pressure down towards your feet. So it's going to take a little bit of pressure off your core as well. So that would be one way to make it harder. Easier, sorry. Now that's not going to be dramatically easier though. So if you really need to walk it back even more, certainly putting your elbows up on a couch, something a little higher, even maybe the arm of a couch or a high bed. Because again, the higher your elbows are, the more pressure that's going to be down below in your feet. and essentially the easier it's going to be. So if you think about it, if I'm leaning against the wall, well, all the pressure is still on my feet, so there's not really a lot of pressure that my midsection has to overcome. And so you certainly can start out high and gradually kind of work your way down until you're down here on the mat. And so I'd say spend as much time on those other variations as you need to, and then once you're ready to get back on the mat, then off you go, and you can start building up time there and then get into some of the variations I'm going to show right now. Okay, so the simplest way to make a traditional plank a little harder is to just spread your base of support. So normally you would sort of have your elbows pretty much in line underneath your shoulders. But if I increase that distance a little bit, say by moving my elbows forward, now I've increased the distance between my elbows and my feet. And by doing that, I'm increasing the demand on my core, so my midsection has to work harder to keep me there. And so again, the farther you spread yourself out, the harder this is going to be. And you could kind of start that process over and start trying to add time with sort of a longer spread position. You're definitely going to find that's going to be quite a bit more challenging. You just have to be a little more careful you're not getting too much demand on your low back, because if you start spreading your base a lot before you're really ready for it, then you might start to compensate, your form's going to start to suffer, and all of a sudden you're going to start feeling low back more in the muscles you're interested in. So just be a little careful with that. Okay, so for those of you looking to make planks a little harder now, maybe you've kind of outgrown a static hold, maybe if you're doing more than a minute or 90 seconds and you can do that fairly comfortably, then you definitely want to start making the planks a little more dynamic. So static planks are just locking them in, holding them as long as you can. Dynamic planks incorporate a little more movement, and certainly there's a lot of movements that are out there. I'm going to talk about a few that I think give some pretty good bang for your buck. Okay, so a really cool dynamic version I like to do are an exercise I call down dog planks. And so all you're going to do for that, sort of like a down dog position in yoga, for those of you who are familiar with it. So your starting position is just going to be your traditional plank. That's kind of what I call your home position. And then from there, you're going to take those hips and just sort of lift them up toward the ceiling. So up you go, down back to your plank, up you go, down back to your plank. And again, you can count how many you're doing here, or you can do it for time, just sort of like you would do with a static plank. But just like anything else, you're just trying to see if you can gradually kind of go more and more. And this is definitely a nice way to start to get after the shoulders, the triceps, definitely some of the upper back muscles, as well as working the core just like you would with a traditional plank. Okay, so another really cool variation that I like is one where you're sort of moving your shoulder blades apart and together as you're doing a plank. And so what you're going to do is go back to your home position, your traditional plank, lock that in, move your shoulder blades kind of apart and together. It's kind of like an exercise we call a shoulder opener, and definitely is going to get a muscle that lives right underneath your scapula called your serratus anterior, as well as your core muscles. It's a really cool variation for those of you looking for a little more upper body strength in addition to some core work. Another variation I really like to do is one where you're going up on your tiptoes as you're doing a plank. And so if you see what my feet are doing on a plank, traditionally they're kind of like I'm standing on the floor. They're just sort of flat here. But if I go all the way down to the tops of my feet and forward, then that puts quite a bit more demand on my upper body. Now it can be a little hard to roll on your toes like this when you just have no shoes on, so I don't typically do this exercise without shoes. It's a little harder on that great toe joint, but with shoes that's a really nice variation. And so what I'm doing there is I'm sort of bringing my shoulder blades together as I'm approaching the mat. I'm not actually touching it, and then I'm spreading my shoulder blades apart as I come away from it. And so again, my shoulder blades are coming together as I'm kind of on the tops of my feet. I'm actually not touching the mat right now. Then I push away and spread my shoulder blades apart. And that's just a really nice way to get two birds with one stone. A lot of the scapular stabilizing muscles in my shoulder blades, as well as a pretty good core workout. Now, if you're really feeling strong, what you can also do is combine those two exercises together. So what you can do is you can go on the tops of your feet, like that last exercise, and then go up to that down dog position, back down to the tops of the feet, down dog again. And that'll combine both of those together and make that exercise pretty tough. Okay, so another quick thing I want to mention about planks is you can definitely add some other specialty items to planks to make them a little harder as well. So, you know, there are definitely variations you can do with Swiss balls, TRXs, and then things like these, you know, lower friction discs you can grab on Amazon for like 10, 15 bucks. And, you know, in theory, you don't even have to have these. You could use some socks or even some towels if you have hardwood flooring. And so some cool things that I've been able to do with these is if you have your feet on them, okay, you can go back into your plank position and then do sort of like a snow angel type maneuver like this. And that's one exercise that's pretty cool. You can slide down and do a little bit of what we call sawing. So trying to keep that plank as you sort of move yourself away from your hands. Or if you're down there, you know, doing sort of like a mountain climber, maybe out to the side variation, certainly can up the ante. We'll try some of this stuff out. Feel free to comment below. And as usual, I will put all the links to these products at the bottom. And I hope you guys have some fun.